Hey guys, these are your multiple choice section for exam 3 notes. We're going to talk about photosynthesis first. You need to know your steps and descriptions. So the first thing that happens is the light reactions will produce NADPH and ATP, and the Calvin cycle will produce sugar after that. Then you need to know the main function of each step. And there's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 questions just about photosynthesis. So I'm going to go through a few of those. Water will come in and it will be split in the chloroplasts into oxygen. So the oxygen comes from the splitting of water. And then the other thing that comes in besides light is carbon dioxide, and that comes into the Calvin cycle. But the Calvin cycle doesn't only require carbon dioxide. The Calvin cycle, CO2 comes in. Yep, it does come in. But it also, from the light dependent reaction, you also get ATP and you also get NADPH. So those things also come into the Calvin cycle to help the Calvin cycle as energy sources to help them fix this carbon dioxide into rubisco, which is a 5-carbon molecule. So this is a 6-carbon, or this carbon is a 1, so this plus this makes a 6-carbon molecule that will go through all kinds of different reactions. So one turn of the Calvin cycle will make 1 glucose, but you can make more complicated things with more turns of the Calvin cycle. Let's see. Okay, I did that one. I'm looking through all of your test questions. I've got them written out here, which ones I need to do. So the function of the Calvin cycle is to fix carbon dioxide, or you could say synthesize simple sugars from carbon dioxide. Whereas the light-dependent reaction, you're doing an electron transport chain. So you are fixing, if you're talking about fixing energy, or taking that light energy and you're converting the light energy into chemical energy in the form of this ATP and NADPH. And that's through an electron transport chain. So light will hit it, it will cause electrons to get all excited and move through it. And what is it moving through? It's moving through proteins in the thylakoid membrane. And as they do, they will pump hydrogen molecules from the outside of the membrane to the inside of the membrane. No, vice versa. Nope, that was right. Outside of the membrane to the inside of the membrane, because then they have to go through ATP synthase back into the stroma of the chloroplast, and that's where the Calvin cycle occurs. Did that one. So everything that happens in photosynthesis, I talked about that. When you make ATP through ATP synthase, ADP is being phosphorylated to make that happen, which means you're adding a phosphate group. That's all that means. So don't get all freaked out and try to figure out what that means. And yes, we do produce oxygen from water, and we do incorporate carbon dioxide, but you've got to remember there's light reactions and there's light independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle. So while carbon does get fixed into the sugar, that happens in the light independent reaction, or the Calvin cycle. It does not happen in the light reactions. So make sure you know that fact. And make sure you know that it goes from photosystem 2 to photosystem 1, because they discovered them backwards. In that light reaction, it'll go from photosystem 2 to photosystem 1 to the Calvin cycle. And those are the steps that the electron transport chain will take. It'll excite the electrons in the chloroplast in photosystem 2, and then or chlorophyll, I guess, in that protein. It'll go from photosystem 2, then they'll move to photosystem 1, then it'll go pump hydrogens through ATP synthase, and then that ATP and NADPH goes to the Calvin cycle. So that's all for photosynthesis. I know I was all over the place. Hopefully you weren't. Good luck. Aerobic respiration has a little question about that electron transport chain that I was talking about. So the same facts apply. You need to know the steps, the descriptions, the reactions, and the products, and the locations for each step. So there's a lot there. There's just a couple of steps of cellular respiration. So Let's talk about them. The first thing that happens is glycolysis. Glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm. During glycolysis, glucose will be broken down into 2 pyruvate molecules, which are both 3 carbons apiece. It will also make a little bit of NADH. Remember, NADH is an electron carrier, and if you don't have enough NADH, then that process will stop. So you have to make NADH for that to occur. So let's go through here. You have 2 pyruvate, you have NADH, and you also have 2 ATP. Remember, when we talk about the benefits of just doing glycolysis, it does make a little bit of ATP. And this again happens in the cytoplasm. So we're not even in the mitochondria yet. Then all of these things transport into this mitochondria. Woo! And they go all the way into the matrix. And in the matrix is where the next step will occur. The next step is called the Krebs cycle. And the Krebs cycle is going to remove all the rest of these carbons from this 3 carbon pyruvates. It removes all those carbons and they come off in the form of carbon dioxide. So every glucose will actually make 6 carbon dioxide because there are 6 carbons in each glucose. But here, before it enters in the Krebs cycle, it changes to acetyl-CoA. And so it changes once more before it enters there. So anyway, the goal is to get rid of all the carbons because the energy isn't stored in the carbons, it's stored in these hydrogens. So we are moving them into that and we're loading up NADH, and we're also making more of the molecule, making more of this, and we're making FADH2. And again, these hydrogens are where that energy in the glucose was stored. From there, these hydrogens will be donated to a process in this membrane, this inner membrane called the electron transport chain. The electron transport chain will pump those hydrogens into this space in the in-between area. It's called the intermembrane space. And finally, they'll get pumped back through this into the matrix again. But this molecule, hopefully you recognize it by now, is ATP synthase. You get a bunch of hydrogens build up on this side. They come back through this and we make a bunch of ATP. That's the big ideal. In order for that to happen, you have to have oxygen because oxygen plus hydrogen makes water. So let me make sure I answered everything going on in your step. So the final electron acceptor, the whole point of me going through all of that, was the first question that involves cellular respiration on your test, which is randomized, by the way. But on my test is oxygen. Number 4, the Krebs cycle. I did tell you that that occurs in the mitochondrial matrix. It is an endergonic reaction because we are taking energy and breaking stuff apart. Need to go to the 20s. Give me just a second to scroll. 24. In cellular respiration, most ATP molecules are produced by, and that is called oxidative phosphorylation because it requires oxygen and it phosphorylates ADP. So we're adding a phosphate to ADP. And again, FADH and NADH are used to transport and store those electrons to the electron transport chain. They're like a transportation truck. 26. And one glucose total at the very end of the process can make 36 to 38 ATP. Each step will produce 2. Glycolysis produces 2. The Krebs cycle produces 2. And then 34 or so ATP in that very last step. And glycolysis and fermentation, it will make 2 ATP. The question says the net result of the breakdown of glucose in glycolysis and fermentation is the production of, and it gives you a few choices: 36 ATP, 4 NADH, 2 ATP, 6 NADH, 2 FADH2, and 2 ATP. You're going to make 2 ATP in that process. You're not making, well, actually, and you're making NADH and FADH2. So you would pick the answer D for that one, but it's going to be randomized, but you want all 3 choices. I'll just give you that one because it's a little bit complicated and we didn't go into that much detail during our lessons. So that's the first couple of things, and I will give you your next things in your next video.